So my name is Mark. I'm an alcoholic. I've been through this process with the help of a Big Book Step Study sponsor. A lot of help from God, with God. I'm still currently making my amends, and I do the best I can every day to work 10, 11, and 12, the best I can. And some days it's better than others. But, this is a great step, right? There's so much in this. It's not a long reading, right? Most of it's talking about Mrs. Brown, but which is confusing when you first read that. Like, I could never wrap my head around that, so I would listen to Joe and Charlie, who would kind of explain it a little bit better. But there's so much in this reading, and I wasn't sure if I was gonna talk about this part today until now, but I heard resentment, right? It talks about in the beginning here, time and effort, it's to discover the truth, right? And I thought to myself, and I highlighted that when I first read this, but I didn't know what the truth was, to be honest. And the truth is, I was living a life where I was the victim, and everyone else was the problem. And this was since I was 5 years old, all the way till I got sober at 30 years old, and even into my recovery, still living that way, where nothing was ever my fault. Even when I wrote my list, those are all just people who did something to me. All of them, every single one of them, I had blamed for something, one thing or another. But what sticks out to me, among other things in this part of this part of step 4 is, resentment basically kills us. And it talks about it in different parts throughout this chapter, but it says that resentment is the number one offender. It destroys more alcoholics than anything. And it's so true. When I first, and I've had a couple pretty serious suicide attempts because of resentment. And I'll share about that a little bit right now, because I think it was 1998, I got sober June 10th, 1998. And on June 7th, which was my daughter's birthday, my oldest daughter, who's now 31 or 32, I'm trying to make her young. I feel old when I think of her being old, so I keep reducing her age. But I think she just turned 32. Her birthday was last couple weeks ago, right? But on that day, on that June 7th, I was disconnected from my family. Everyone had turned their back on me, because I stole all their money and I did all these things to them, but even though it was still their fault, right? And I was going to be going to jail in 3 days from then, on June 10th. So I had a lot of fear and a lot of guilt and a lot of shame built up, and I was just in a mess, right? And I certainly couldn't see my role at all in any of these problems. What was bringing me to jail was a really serious car accident where I had stolen $5,000 from this girl's house, got into her car, drove the wrong way up a one-way street with a bunch of other hoodlums, and hit a person head on. I was the only one that didn't get hurt. It was crazy, and I looked around and they were pretty banged up. The girl, she got pretty seriously hurt. No one died, luckily. But I had a pocket full of money, and I'm like, there's no way I'm going to jail tonight, because I'm going to spend all this money on coke and drinking. It was just not going to screw my night up. So I just kind of scanned the area and bolted. And I had done a lot of other things leading up to that point in stuff in the city, breaking into houses and assault and battery, all kinds of destruction. Somehow I was always able to avoid jail time, it was mostly because of my uncle, because he was a judge. I'll be transparent. And he's retired now, so he won't be offended by me sharing that, But he apologized to me several years ago, thinking that he should have just let me take the consequences. Right. And he was right, really, because I just had a ticket get out of free jail card the whole time. So 3 days before I was doing this, I was just, pretty much all my friends and all my family, except for my grandfather, had turned their back on me, for good reason, really, But it was my daughter's birthday, and I wasn't able to go because I was up the night before, for a couple nights, and I said, I'm going to take my life today. And on her birthday. I mean, how selfless is that? Could you imagine if I had, I think about that now, and I think, holy shit, I might have ruined her birthday for the rest of her life. Never mind the fact that she doesn't have a father to, take care of her and all that stuff. So I wrote this note, and it was all resentment which got me there, which is why I'm talking about that. It was a life of anger and pain and fear and shame that got me to this point of not wanting to live. So I raped the suicide note, my stuff in my pocket, and I was serious too. I was on the train tracks, and the train was coming, and it was going pretty fast, and I knew that if I had done this, I probably would have succeeded to do what I wanted to do at that time. And I swear, my daughter said, "Don't do it, Daddy." And I could hear her like she was 10 feet behind me. And I know this is true because there was something that came over me. I backed away. And something flooded my body. Like some spirit or the Holy Spirit or whatever it was flooded me. And I've never felt like that since. And it was the most peace and the most calm I've ever had. Now, you think about my life up until that point, living in resentment and anger and fear my whole life with all this self-seeking behavior, I was pretty knotted up, and I was always really tense and I was always really angry. So to have that peace and that clarity for that, I don't even know, it felt like a year. It was probably 10 seconds. It got me away from the train tracks for sure. And I know God spoke to me because he said it's going to be okay. Go do your time and it's going to be okay. I haven't drank since. So whatever happened that day helped me at least not drink. Now, there's a lot of other shit that was going on, right, that I didn't heal. So I came to this meeting in 2015, and I went to one of these big book step study meetings on Lincoln Street at St. Bernard's a few years before with a friend of mine who was newly sober. Now, I was going to AA here and there, and I wasn't consistent, so I had really no idea what the big book was. I was 12, 13 years sober when I went to that meeting on St. Bernard Street, and I never opened this book. And I didn't know any information about it. And of course, our process is pretty stringent, right? And you can't speak unless you have finished it. And some girl tried to share, and the speaker, like Jackie, would have been, the chairperson said to her, "Excuse me, you can't talk." And the girl started bawling, and the thing broke out into chaos. I was just like, I didn't know the system, the process, and I was just sitting there going, "What the hell? Where am I? Like, why can't you talk?" And of course, now I jump on her side. I don't blame them. Let's get out of here. I'm kind of supporting her. There's other people kind of behind her. So there was other people who were there that also didn't know the format. And I was just like, I'm never going back there again. But I looked it up, and I knew it was a big book step study. I just didn't know what it entailed. And then, so when a few people in my life had suggested that I come here, kind of like Jackie, they had saw my behaviors going sideways. I didn't know why all these people were suggesting for me to go to an AA meeting. I just did it, My aunt, who wasn't in the program, she had went through the process somehow. She went through Al-Anon and then went through her sponsor, and I was really resentful at her because she's evangelizing me on the phone, and I'm just like, shut the hell up. And I love her to death, but I was mad and resentful at her, And a couple other people that I had met said, "You should come to this meeting." And then I was just, again, my life came crashing down because, at this point in my life, I was relying on people to make me feel good, in situations to make me feel good, and I wanted to get up in the morning and drive to work and go to Starbucks. I was drinking and have no one in line, right? 5:30 in the morning, people should be sleeping except for me. So I'd pull up and someone would be in line, or a couple cars, forget it if it was a couple cars. I'd be like so pissed that, why aren't you sleeping? Why are you here? And this is on my way to work, And then I'd get on the highway and I'd want people to pull over. And just get out of my way so I could go 100 miles an hour up 190. And they wouldn't do that. So people weren't doing and acting and doing things and saying things the way I wanted them. And that had been going on for a long time, right? In my mind, I wanted to go everywhere and just be treated. I wanted to get into work and be carried around the office and told how amazing I was. And that never happened. It still hasn't happened. Even when I retire, it's probably not going to happen, right? But that's how I handled life. And I was dependent on other people in situations to feel good. And that's a dangerous spot, like my sponsor said to me, you're handing out jobs that people didn't apply for. And I was like, damn right. Lots of them. I had a lot of people employed for me. So I show up, again, a week before I came here, my behaviors, my untreated alcoholism, my spiritual malady was completely, I was detached from everything. I wasn't drinking somehow. I wasn't using. I don't know how or why I hadn't put a drink or a drug in my body because I really needed to, but I didn't have a thought about it for some reason. Probably God protecting me because at that point I had lost our house, our cars, everything gone. Without alcohol or without drugs present, all because I used this for an excuse. I was resentful at my wife because she got pregnant. I had nothing to do with it. At least, knowing my daughter, I definitely did, but because she looks like me and acts like me. But at that time, I was going to teach her a lesson. Because I was so angry at her. Because I didn't really, at the time, I wasn't planning on having another child. I had one that I was already struggling to parent, and I just didn't think that I never really thought I was a good parent. I always think that I'm not doing good enough at anything. And she gets pregnant, and I'm like, that's it. I'm going to have an affair on you. I'm not going to give you any money for the mortgage. I'm not going to give you any money for the car payments. I'm going to show her. And I did. We lost it all. And I really taught her a really good lesson, right? Meanwhile, I end up we have to rent a house. I end up in the garage with the door shut, in the car. So I'm teaching her a really good lesson here, right? And again, like my youngest daughter, I hear her say, "Please, Daddy, don't do it." Now, was I really serious about doing this? I think I was, because I was at a real low point in my life where I still had my job somehow. I don't know how. I had lost a really good job where I was a part-time court investigator, but it was like full-time money. And I had lost that because of my behaviors there too. I was not showing up because I was off running around with this chick, and I wasn't showing up to to interview the house. I just wasn't doing my job well. So the clerk in Springfield told my uncle that he's going to let me go. And that was another financial hit, like a huge hit for me. And on top of all this other crap. So I was just a mess inside. So again, I have this experience where, my youngest daughter now, both of my daughters have pretty much saved my life at different points. They don't know this, and they're probably not going to listen to this unless they really stumble upon something that they shouldn't be listening to, But they have at different points in their life pulled me out of these dark spots. So I'm thankful for them for a lot of things. Not just that, but so I show up here. And again, I'm in pain, right? And we hear this story all the time with people in here, and most people are coming in here for the same reason, multiple years sober with no solution. Mm-hmm. And again, I came in here with no solution. I like sitting in the back. I don't like people behind me. And I say this all the time because I have big ears, so I feel if I'm back there, then no one's behind me. Because again, my selfishness is like, you got to be looking at me, right? I'm in your way. And I just like to kind of be in my own little bubble, really, is what it really comes down to. It's not my ears as much as it is I can't focus. If I was up here with Joe, I'd be screwed. I would just be so in my head, but I get back there and I hear Arthur, my sponsor, speaking. And I'm thinking to myself, I forgot what step he was on, but everything out of his mouth wasn't about his, he shared a little bit about his, his addiction and his drunkalog type stuff. And, I guess I identify with it. He grew up in Worcester, I grew up in Worcester, and he was running around Piedmont Street probably the same times I was, but I never saw him, I never ran across him, or at least I don't think I did. And I identify with that part of the story a little bit, but what I heard there was so much solution and so much God and so much. I thought I was at like a church Bible study, and I'd never been at a meeting. Well, like I said, I went to that one at St. Bernard's, but I wasn't in a space to hear it. And I guess at that point, God wasn't wanting me to hear it. But what got me to those two dark spots in my life was a lifelong list of resentments, and I didn't know that until I started, doing the work. And when I was asked to sit down and do the cause and effects, who did what to me, basically, right? I started seeing all these people from my past who I didn't really know that I still had problems with. I wrote, I think I went back to him a couple times and said, keep coming up with people, because I initially put like 30 people down. That was probably one day, really, you know what I mean? And I go back and I have like maybe 80 people down. Yeah, you're close, but you're 40 years old, so you got more, basically, you're not thinking, you're not digging deep. And, finally end up with like 150. Now that I know what the work entailed afterwards, I probably would have settled on 30, right? After when I started turning them around, I was like, geez, it's going to take the rest of my life. And it did take a long time, but it was only because I wasn't putting the effort in as much, But when I wrote these causes down, teachers come flying out, right? Growing up in the 80s, the teachers weren't, I was looking for people to treat me a certain way. And if you didn't treat me that way, you were coming on this list. And I wanted people to be nice to me. I wanted people to love me. I just wanted people to like me, really. And I really, developed people-pleasing skills because I didn't like not being accepted. And that started with teachers. Again, handing out the teacher the job, It wasn't the teacher's job in school to love me. It was their job to teach me. And I was a wild maniac. I had ADHD, I was climbing all over everything. So I can understand now why they didn't want me in the class or weren't nice to me. Even in gym I had a problem, right? And that's when recess was a problem. I was just out of control. And but again, in my mind, these people should be nice to me. They should be kind to me. They should love me. They should not throw erasers at me. They shouldn't pull me by the ears, which stretched them out even more, Make me sit in the corner. All that shaming that they used to do, gave me a lot of PTSD for sure, So I write that list down. I write the causes down. But then I write the pride, the selfishness, the ambition, and the security stuff. And that's when I started seeing me as the problem. Yeah, I couldn't understand why, I looked at people as a comfort when it wasn't their position to do that to me, and I had to look at where I was selfish. What are you talking about? I didn't do anything wrong here. My pride certainly was involved in almost every single thing, right? Because, as people, sometimes our pride dominates us, and it's not a good thing, right? But my ambition, what did I want from it? Well, I wanted them to be nice to me, right? How did it affect my security? Well, I was already kind of had low self-esteem. So you throw that on top of, I think, Arthur would say you're a person who walks around with PTSD. And when people with PTSD, when you do something that they perceive to affect them, it's going to tear off that Band-Aid and it's, kind of undo that stuff, undo that trauma that you didn't like, And, I struggled with this part. It took me a long time. The causes came flying off. But when I had to look at the pride, the selfishness, the ambition, and security, I had a hard time because I could see that I was the common denominator here. And I didn't like that. And I didn't want to accept that. I didn't want to accept that I might have been the perpetrator in all these resentments. And when I'm really transparent about this, when I go back at that cause list, there's no one on there that did anything to me. I mean, there are people who have things done to them, right? And some serious harmful things done to them. I didn't have anything done to me. I was the one doing it and the one blaming them for it. Really well, too. Really putting it on those people. And then I'm thinking to myself, holy shit, I've heard about amends. This is a long list of people. I don't want to have to make amends to all these people. So I kind of would stop writing for months and then go back to it. And, just torturing myself with the writing because, when you're doing the writing, it's helping us. But when you stop, it kind of backfires a little bit, and you get stuck and then you're just kind of in that, void. And it's dangerous to be in that area, When I started doing this work, I was in a lot of pain. Things weren't going well when I showed up here. I wasn't just killing life. I came in here because I was in a really dark spot and hopeless. And this meeting gave me hope. And I had to keep telling myself that, this was working. Going to meetings before that didn't work. Going to therapy, I think I went to therapy a little bit. That didn't work. Nothing I had ever tried in my life worked. Except when I started writing a little bit. And I started kind of looking at myself and realizing, okay, this is not terrible. I am the problem, but that's good because I can correct that. I can't correct, Jackie, as much as I want to have her follow me around with balloons and have her pray for me every day. But she's got a long list of resentments against me too, so she'd be dangerous, right? But when it really turned around for me is when I did the turnarounds. And I had to look at, where I really was bad was the self-seeking stuff. If you did something to me, I would bash you like Babe Ruth. Not physically back in the day, I would probably hit you with a bat. But sober, I was just in my head, right? I'd go around and talk about you, hurt you to other people, just bash you internally everywhere with my mind. And just try to rally people behind me, right? To prove my point. And I was always doing that. My fear was dominating me, But I would say that the self-seeking part was the most dangerous and the most harmful. Because that's where I really saw my behaviors in a really bad way. And over the last few years, when I do turnarounds, especially over the last year, I'm kind of proud of myself. Like even when I was pissed at Jackie a couple weeks ago, it was something stupid. But, again, we had a little bicker about something, and I didn't bash her to anyone, somehow. And that's the truth. I was in my head going, I'm going to text this, I'm going to say something to someone. I didn't do it. So when I did the turnaround, I could honestly say the only part that I was self-seeking was I was bashing her in my own mind. I didn't call Joe and say, Joe, that fucking Jackie from the meeting, she's an asshole. I didn't do any of that. But that's those are new behaviors to me, and they're still, and I really, when I fall into resentments, over probably, I've been through this work now since COVID, whenever that was now, so 5 years. Still, even up for the last 4 years, I was still having that self-seeking behavior where I would, just do that. It would just make it worse, right? I would replay that resentment, and, it wasn't my fault. I couldn't look at my own role in it. Still, after doing the work, I struggled with it. And it's because I just wasn't doing certain things. I wasn't staying connected in certain ways, and I wasn't, being consistent with my turnarounds and doing my inventory at night. And that really kind of, you go through this work, which is a lot of effort, right? It's like getting a PhD at some point, or a degree. It's just educational, it's informative, and it's a lot of internal work that most people, we're blessed to have this work. I work as a master's level therapist, and anybody who works with me, they're really good at their jobs too. But they don't know this work. I know Joe, he does his work, and I know he uses this work in his work. It's that makes him really capable of helping people on another level. Because this stuff really, if you're really to look at yourself, will, help and heal you in a way that nothing has ever had heal you. I don't have those, I don't say I'm perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but I have a way out of it every night. When I have this issue with someone, and I have a way out of it during the day, I pause now on situations, which is very rare, right? Before I was very reactive, and I would react on that person. Now I at least pause, and then I might react, but I do have the pause in there, and I do have the ability at night to, look at it and talk and send it to my sponsor or send it to someone, and I do that, and it really has turned my life around. It's the turnaround part that has morphed me into this person where I'm not so reliant on everyone, and I can drive to work, and if people are speeding and people are cutting me off, I don't care anymore. I just don't, because I don't know what's going on in that person's life, so it's not my business. And because I was doing that, so it's okay, and I'm able to kind of carry this stuff into my home life, because most of our bullshit or resentments come at home or at work, right? I mean, those are the places we are the most. And if I could show up into these places in a very spiritual way, and again, it's not perfect because there are days where I don't, but I'm able to kind of catch that at the end of the night and usually come back the next day, and maybe say I'm sorry to the person or text the person or apologize or correct it before it goes too far. And I don't want to go back to where I was. I don't want to treat people in my life like that, and the turnaround part of this process is probably the most, healing part, where I was dishonest, where at fear. I was always dishonest. Fear was fear. Jesus, it was never the number one. It was always the number one problem in my life. So to know that this was a part of this process, and to write these things down and look at my fear, I don't have fears, right? But I have a lot of fears, and usually around people, how people think of me, things like that. And it comes out ugly. And I don't want to do that to people. I have 2 daughters that I love, a wife that I love, and a granddaughter. Those are my, not my brothers, sisters, and mom, and things like that. That I don't want to put them through this again. I'm still hanging on to a couple of amends that I have to make, and they're, again, fear is stopping me. But I think that's all I have to say.